Let's discuss Mercury in the fifth house. If you have Mercury in the fifth house, you may also want to consider the implications of Mercury in the 11th house. Because when Mercury occupies the fifth sign from the ascendant, it's very likely that it has a significant aspect on the 11th sign from the ascendant. Vice versa, if you have Mercury in the 11th house, you might want to wind up here in this video. Now, let's begin our discussion of Mercury in the fifth, starting with a quick review of what the fifth house is. The fifth house is a part of the underground quadrant, so it has to do with the things that are internal to our being. But it's on the western side of that underground section. So everything about the fifth house has to do with the way our internal being moves towards other people. We can separate that into two symbolic columns. One is the way we express or share our ideas, and the other is the way we express or share our feelings. On these two columns, we can understand everything that the fifth house is known for. Fifth is the house of intelligence, because intelligence is our capacity to share and exchange ideas. The fifth house is the house of communication, because how do you exchange ideas? By communication. The fifth is the house of expression, because how do you communicate? By expressing. And so since it's the house of expression, it also has to do with creativity and art. The fifth is the house of empathy or compassion or sympathy, because it's about how well we share feelings with other people. The fifth house is the house of love, because that's what empathy basically is. Finally, the fifth house is famous as the house of children. This is because literally the western section of the underground portion means how we produce another person from within ourselves. Also, children are related to the other two columns of meaning of the fifth house. Children are produced by love. Children are the easiest object for love. And children represents productivity, fertility, creativity. Now that we're up to speed on the fifth house, let's quickly get up to speed about Mercury, and then we can talk about Mercury in the fifth house. Fundamentally, Mercury represents intellect. Intellect has to do with the way we process codes and put things into codes or patterns. So Mercury is a planet of communication, because that's how you understand codes and patterns in languages and sounds and words and numbers, etc. Mercury is the planet of interaction, because what do you do when you communicate? You interact. Mercury is the planet of relationships, because that's what interaction leads to. Mercury is the planet of recreation, because having relationships with people means friendship. Friendships means play. So Mercury has to do with relaxation, recreation, having fun, being funny, being youthful and childlike. Mercury is the planet of learning, because learning is the ability to recognize and comprehend patterns and codes. Mercury is the planet of organization, because what is organization? It's the ability to keep things in good patterns. Mercury is the planet of symmetry, because what is symmetry? It's organization of patterns. Mercury is the planet of dexterity, because symmetry gives balance, and balance gives dexterity, and dexterity implies expertise, talent, finesse. Now that we took a little time to refresh ourselves on the fifth house and Mercury, it's fairly easy to talk about what Mercury represents when it's in the fifth house. To have that discussion, all we need to do is put the symbolism of Mercury next to the symbolism of the fifth house and see where things link up. For example, Mercury represents intellect, and the fifth house represents intelligence. So obviously, the symbolism is linked up here. And intelligence is going to be something important about how you interpret Mercury in the fifth house. Mercury is a planet of friendship and relationships. The fifth house has to do with love and empathy. And friendship or love is going to be an important part of interpreting Mercury in the fifth house. Mercury represents communication. Fifth house represents expression. And so communicative expression is a key aspect of Mercury in the fifth house. Finally, Mercury is youthful, childlike, and the fifth house has to do with children. So these are like 4 seeds of how you interpret Mercury in the fifth house. If we take each seed and put it in soil, in other words, if we put it into the context of a chart, it will grow into a tree that shows an exact form that represents a particular interpretation. Let me show you the way that the tree generally grows for each one of these seeds. For example, we said that Mercury represents intellect and the fifth house represents intelligence. So intellect should be an important part of how we interpret Mercury in the fifth house. So we should say this native with Mercury in the fifth house is intelligent. And what do we mean by intelligent? They are educated. They like education. They like to get information. They like to be educated. We can say that they're brilliant. They come up with new ideas. They're inventive. And we can say that they're fit to teach and fit to guide or advise people. So I'd like to mention 3 examples of people with Mercury in the fifth house right now. Karl Marx, Malcolm X, and Leonardo da Vinci. These are very intelligent, philosophical, idealistic people who are also big advisors or leaders or teachers, who are also very new in their thinking. They're brilliant. Leonardo da Vinci in particular really seems to exemplify the brilliance of Mercury in the fifth house. So let's take a second to look at the soil of his particular chart. So you can see, in addition to him having Mercury in the fifth house, he also has a Sagittarius ascendant. He also has Jupiter and the moon tightly joined in Pisces. Finally, his Mercury in the fifth house has the aspect of an exalted planet from the 11th. And also, his fifth lord has the same aspect. Now let's look at the second seed of Mercury's interpretation when it's in the fifth house. The thing about Mercury representing friendship and the fifth house having to do with love. What do we expect from this? We expect this person to be friendly. In other words, they're sort of warm. They're not cold. In other words, they're empathetic. They feel for you. They're not callous. The third seed of Mercury in the fifth house, Mercury is communication, and fifth house is expression. So what do we say about people with Mercury in the fifth house? They're persuasive. In other words, not only are they empathetic to others, but they can make other people empathetic towards them. They know what to say. They know how to express themselves in such a way that other people will listen and pay attention and understand what they're saying. In this regard, I'd like to mention Aretha Franklin, Anais Nin, and the Malcolm X and the other people that we already mentioned. The people previously mentioned, like Karl Marx and Malcolm X, they had a huge audience, many people listening to them. But think about Aretha Franklin and Anais Nin. Anais Nin, everybody wants to read her diaries because she's able to create empathy. Aretha Franklin, everybody wants to listen to her because they identify with her. Her voice and her words and her way of expressing herself creates an empathy in the listener. Finally, Mercury represents youth and the fifth house represents children. So what do you expect from people with Mercury in the fifth house? They're youthful. They get along well with children, and you'll probably find them surrounded with children a lot, which also means surrounded by people that they're raising. So it also means surrounded by students, surrounded by followers, like in the case of Malcolm X, like in the case of Karl Marx. But it can also mean school teachers. It can also mean parents that are very good at raising lots of kids. One more chart I want to mention with Mercury in the fifth house is Krishna's chart, according to Surdas. So he's a great example of all of these aspects of Mercury in the fifth, because he's extremely intelligent and the guider of everybody. And at the same time, extremely youthful and friendly and relatable. So it's a very good example of Mercury in the 5th house. And see, his Mercury in the 5th house is in Virgo. So it's exalted, and it's in mutual aspect with Jupiter, who is also domicile. So hopefully this shows you the basis of what Mercury in the 5th house is all about, the 4 seeds of how you can understand it, and then how those seeds tend to grow into interpretations. But you should always realize that depending upon the soil of the chart, it will change or alter the way that the seed grows. If you want to understand the whole context of your chart, the soil in which your interpretive seeds grow, then visit my website, vicdecara.com, and click Readings. My complete chart report explains each and every nook and cranny of your chart and will keep you occupied in self-discovery for years. I also have 2 groundbreaking new reports. The first of these, Your Nakshatra, organizes your active nakshatras in order of their importance to you and presents the fundamental interpretations for the planets that occupy them. The newest report, Star Strength, uses a system called Tara Habala to unfold 90 interpretations of the nuanced relationships between all the planets in your chart, which paints a rich and detailed picture of how your various strengths cooperate or compete with each other. Order these or any of my reports and accelerate your journey to deeper self-understanding.